and really it kind of walks softly and tries to carry a big stick, not to use like a worn Teddy Roosevelt quote, but I think it really does that. And I think for people that have been around Ethereum from the beginning, it's always punched above its weight and exceeded expectations because of that. Has a real heads down energy around it. And when it sees problems, it may take a little bit longer to solve them, but we know that they're going to get solved in a careful, thoughtful way.
Hey, welcome to the show. It's January 20th, 2023. I'm DeFi Dad. I am a super user, educator, and investor at Fourth Revolution Capital. And I'm joined here today by Aaron Wright, who is, I think, best described as an early pioneer in Ethereum, crypto, Web3, NFTs. He has been a founding member of the DAO, a founding member of Flamingo DAO, and more recently, I believe he spends most of his time now with Tribute Labs, which works with countless DAOs that I'm actually a part of as well, like Ready Player DAO. So Aaron, thanks for joining me. How are you doing? Welcome to the show.
Doing great. Thanks for the kind intro. I don't know, pioneer seems strong, but definitely been in, playing around with blockchain technology for probably way too long at this point. Happy to be here.
You looked like a crazy person at least 5 or 6 years ago, and
I didn't
now you look like a much smarter person to everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of feel like the same person, but I mean, I think that's the fun part about crypto, right? Like, I think a lot of folks that were around early, particularly around Ethereum, like it just felt natural, right? It was like a logical extension of lots of things that they were working on, if they were in finance or they were computer scientists or if they were, other people that were just super deep on different open source developments or just technology in general. Like it just felt like many people kind of found their tribe, like their people that shared a lot of the same interests. And I think that's in part why we've seen so many powerful kind of communities congeal and form and grow around Ethereum and other comparable blockchain or blockchain-like systems.
Yeah. Why don't we start there then? How did you find your tribe in Ethereum? Because a part of our history as friends and like colleagues, I guess, is I worked at ConsenSys, and you were the founder of this protocol called OpenLaw, which was very, very early in Ethereum to think about how to basically use smart contracts for legal use cases. It was actually one of the stories that drew me into ConsenSys. I saw you speak at a conference called Ethereal. I saw you speak at a meetup, and it was one of the few use cases that really clicked for me, even though it was 2017, 2018. So maybe talk a bit about like, how did you ever get into Ethereum and crypto, and what led you to found OpenLaw?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if to be happier or hopefully you're not too sad that this is your path that you took. And for me, really, I've always been interested in this kind of intersection of law and technology, and just the internet more broadly. I was fortunate enough to be on the internet at a very, very young age. My father was actually a researcher that worked for the state of New York, which was connected to like the original internet, like pre, World Wide Web. So when I was young, we just had a lot of computers around. He was doing his business, his work on the internet, and I just kind of had a second chair to that. And it just animated me. And when I kind of saw the first wave of the internet, I was in, middle school and high school. It really just captured me. And it was something that I always wanted to work and be a part of. Kind of on the timing side, just when I graduated college and kind of the market cycles, I wasn't able to kind of participate in the first wave, but was fortunate enough to really get into kind of Web 2 before it was even being branded that way, and did a lot around the Wikipedia ecosystem. And in part of, one of the reasons why I was so excited about the Wikipedia ecosystem is because it was being built on open source technology. So whenever there was an open source project, I just would dig in, try to understand what was going on with it, and just continued to kind of experiment. I was fortunate enough to sell a company to Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia. He set up a for-profit sister project to Wikipedia, which at the time was called Wikia. It's now called Fandom. And so an early kind of pre-Facebook cannibalizing all of Web 2. and other kind of related platforms. When it was all about user-generated content and online communities, I was able to help build out a project that that was really focused on that. And from, kind of from that experience with, communities, open source technology, when Bitcoin really started to kind of break through from the early cypherpunk mailing list, it just caught my attention. And in college, I not only was able to study a little bit of technology, I kind of got into programming just late enough in my college to not major in it, although I wanted to by the end. But I also studied history and economics, so Bitcoin was like the perfect Venn diagram for me, right? It hit me in all my intellectual kind of sweet spots, and so I began to kind of dig in on that more and more. Going to reading up as much as I could about it. Really just trying to understand the community. I think for many folks that have looked at Bitcoin or now Ethereum or other kind of blockchain-based systems, it's kind of a similar journey. Mine just happened to start a little bit earlier. And when Ethereum was announced, I was super geeked out on this notion of extending Bitcoin into other parts of the ecosystem. I was already geeked out on these kind of notions of smart contracts, and had digested all the works of Nick Szabo and earlier folks that began to think about that. So when Vitalik announced Ethereum, I was kind of ready for it, right? And I think many folks in the Bitcoin ecosystem were, and really Ethereum felt like the first substantive attempt from good faith brokers and actors to try to build out a more generalized version of Bitcoin. So once it was announced, I was fortunate enough to bump into Joe Lubin, who's the founder of ConsenSys, before ConsenSys was started, before Ethereum was started, or really when Ethereum was starting, and was able to help out a bit with the launch of Ethereum, which was really fun and interesting and exciting. And from there, I just kind of continued to dig in. I was at the time a professor at Cardozo Law School full-time, and really began to think about some of these challenging questions and regulatory issues that I think we're all kind of grappling with today and have really for years. So as part of that effort, I co-authored a book that Harvard published on blockchain law and policy. I wrote a couple of academic papers related to it. And also at the same time, and really even before Ethereum launched, this notion of smart contracts was super animating. It's animated a lot of lawyers. And so we thought, hey, let's really try to figure out, how do we kind of bridge digital assets with the real world? So that was a big question that I was trying to tackle. And that kind of manifested in a project OpenLaw, which ConsenSys was kind enough to support. And in many ways, that was almost like an R&D lab that we were running to think about, okay, like what does this look like in 10, 20 plus years? So we were playing around with concepts like real-time payments and exotic financial instruments and DAOs. And also, I think we were the first group to talk about things like fractionalized NFTs, whether those are good or bad, whether they work or not. Like, I think it's too soon to tell, but we had kind of like a space to begin to like throw stuff against the wall and see what stuck. So I was fortunate to do that. And that's kind of all manifested into Tribute Labs, where I'm the CEO and co-founder, where we're really focused on helping to support and build DAOs, DAO tooling. And that's been a really great experience, which I'm assuming we're going to dive into in a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Lots of different experiences and types of startups that you've worked on. You have a common story in terms of being early to crypto and, discovering Bitcoin early on. But there are so many others who, at the time saw, I guess, Ethereum as, I want to say either like a dead end project or, veering from like the purest path of what Bitcoin was supposed to be. I think it's easy for us to like glaze over this now and look back at the fact that you made the decisions you did and you've had this, really rich career participating in all parts of the Ethereum ecosystem. What gave you the confidence to invest in the Ethereum ecosystem at that time? Because if I was put in a time machine and I were you back then, I'm not sure if I would have had the bravery to put my time and effort where you ultimately did.
I think it was really the concept, right? So Bitcoin is a very, very powerful concept. And whether the community calls out to you, whether you find it to be like an attractive asset to hold, just the concept around Bitcoin it's amazing, right? The notion that you can build these systems, a currency without a central bank, is earth-shattering. It's something that wasn't possible to do before Bitcoin. It was something lots of computer scientists and researchers and cypherpunks were trying to figure out for literally decades beforehand. And Satoshi, whether that's an individual or a group, they figured it out. And that was groundbreaking. I think the tension people always felt around Bitcoin is it's very conservative in the sense that it just wants to be Bitcoin. It doesn't want to be anything else. But a lot of folks in the early Bitcoin ecosystem wanted a more general purpose, Bitcoin, something broader, something larger. And really Ethereum was the first clear example of a system that was developed by Vitalik and others that felt like it could actually do it. But it was weird, right? Vitalik was very young at the time. He was also a writer for Bitcoin magazine. So just to kind of ground you back into it, it would be like if a reporter at CoinDesk, and CoinDesk is amazing, and maybe some reporters are capable of doing this, just said that they were going to launch like a brand new, smart contracting platform. It naturally raised some eyebrows from some of the folks in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And I think many people just didn't believe that that Ethereum could be built, either because of security concerns, either because they had questions about Vitalik and some of the other folks that were there, not because there was any bad intention with them, but just because of their youth and the fact that they weren't as experienced developers at the time. But they were able to pull it off. To me, it was fairly obvious. So I was fortunate enough with working around Wikipedia. My sister also does a lot with open source technology. I've gotten a flavor for open source technology projects and know that you really need a strong group supporting it with the right real mentality and a very low ego in order for those ecosystems to grow and flourish. And I think Vitalik and other folks that were around the Ethereum at the beginning, they seemed to kind of hit those marks. So I had a lot of confidence that they'd be able to kind of pull it together and actually make it happen. So the choice, it wasn't brave to me. It seemed quite logical, right? Like Bitcoin was amazing. It's at some point it was going to get extended. It should be, kind of a very open source project, very decentralized off the bat in order for it to succeed. And it seemed like Ethereum was kind of the right mix of people at that time who were in the best position to kind of make that happen. And really, the more interesting use cases that we're seeing on Ethereum, it was all getting ideated back then, and it was hard not to be excited about it. So all these smart contracting platforms, even early kind of concepts around NFTs, the things that we've really seen in the past couple of years, people were already, thinking about it, manifesting it, trying to build kind of crude examples of it in the Bitcoin ecosystem and into the early Ethereum ecosystem. So it's kind of hard not to get excited about all that developer activity, et cetera. I do think the Bitcoin ecosystem has changed over time a bit, and I think, there's trade-offs with that. But in my mind, Bitcoin is still kind of like the first love that I have, and Ethereum that, definitely has taken up more of my time, but they're both wonderful projects. And I don't think it's, that's the one thing I've always been a little sad about. It's not really like a binary choice. Like we're all kind of in this together. We're all kind of building these powerful new financial and cultural primitives. So we should really be rooting and working together to kind of help birth that future into reality.
Can you dive deeper on like this social fabric I think you're describing about Ethereum? Like what is that set of values that seems to emanate throughout the community? Even though it's made up of a very diverse group of, individuals, contributors, developers, investors, and so on, I think about this in regard to Ethereum just having grown up so much, over the years, and the fact that now we're seeing, real L2s finally stood up and accruing users that I think in a very short time is going to eclipse the amount of users that are transacting on Ethereum mainnet. Can that social fabric or those values, will that be passed along to those Ethereum L2s? And if it's not, does that put us at risk of something being lost? Like, will Ethereum ultimately have to change as it scales?
I mean, I think all ecosystems kind of change as they scale, right? But I think the right substrates in the Ethereum ecosystem, it's always been ambitious. The notion that you could generalize Bitcoin was very, very ambitious, right? The notion that you could kind of build, all these financial primitives and cultural primitives that we're seeing built today on Ethereum, just the fact that there was an aspiration to do that, I think really brought some of the best people around the world together. And like we're seeing in DAOs and like we see online, there's just so many talented people from around the globe. and having kind of the shared vision of improving the financial system, improving the way capital is financed, improving, the way that creators get compensated. These are big problems that we all feel, especially if you're more of an internet native. And Ethereum really is a broad tent to kind of bring that together. But it does that without, I think, the same hubris that we've seen in other projects. And it kind of walks softly and tries to carry a big stick, not to use like a worn Teddy Roosevelt quote, but I think it really does that. And I think for people that have been around Ethereum from the beginning, it's always punched above its weight and exceeded expectations because of that. It has a real heads down energy around it. And when it sees problems, it may take a little bit longer to solve them, but we know that they're going to get solved in a careful, thoughtful way. And I think the merge, which happened at this point just less than a year ago, right? Was a real testament to that. Yes, we talked about that for a long time, but that transition was seamless. And I don't think other communities are kind of capable of that. And I also think, Ethereum in many ways like embraces the weirdness of the internet, right? It's an open enough ecosystem that you can kind of be yourself in it and you can explore different areas without being felt like you need to get shut down or other things like that. And I also think the fact that it really didn't start with the backing of a traditional enterprise, whether that's a venture capital fund or a university, I think it's been helpful because it really gives an organic feel to it. And the last piece, I think, is why Ethereum is still set up for success, and I think these cultural things will continue to carry through, is because of a lot of those early founders and creators and builders. It was built in a way so that it had multiple implementations of languages that developers could play around with, right? On nodes, like it was pretty broad off the bat, and it had a bunch of people from all over the planet working together, right? It wasn't just from like some lab in San Francisco or New York or London, right? It had people from all over the world kind of working together, which I think is helpful. And I think last but not least, I think it has this, founders that are very low ego. They don't want to be the center of attention. They want the community to kind of really birth this vision, this kind of shared vision together without overly shaping it in some sort of way. And I think that's going to be very, very hard to replicate. So while it's super exciting to see, all these new ZK rollups and other projects kind of emerge, I think really Ethereum will prove to be the spine behind it. And a lot of these cultural norms will probably move over into some of these ecosystems. And if they don't, right, maybe that's a good thing too. And you kind of have different communities experimenting with different approaches and we can kind of see what works. But I think this is all kind of a net positive. I think the more rollups or other systems that are kind of rooting back into Ethereum in some sort of way, just the bigger the network effect for everybody. And that I think is a big theme that I think we're going to see more and more of over the next 18 months, 2 years. Like who knows the time horizon, but I think that's definitely coming to fruition.
Do you recall any of the theses that you had more confidence in, let's say like 2016, 2017 era, that you expected to play out? And if you do, can you assess like which of those we've been successful in achieving and if any of those are yet to be achieved or you're anticipating in the next few years?
I mean, I think Ethereum's really hit a lot of those objectives. If you haven't read, the initial Ethereum white paper or yellow paper, you should read them. I mean, they're super interesting reading, and a lot of the stuff that we've begun to see over the past couple of years, it's coming to fruition, whether that's DAOs or DeFi primitives, right? Those were core concepts that people were ideating quite a bit about even before Ethereum launched, and we're beginning to see kind of the fruits of it. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Is there a long way to go with a lot of these things? Absolutely. But these kind of core concepts of having, organizations that aren't run by essential managers, but are run more democratically or ideally, automatically or autonomously, we're beginning to see the glimmers of that. I think DeFi has made huge steps forward, although there's still a lot of work that needs to be done there. Some technical, some regulatory, lots of challenges. I think one thing that people were speaking a lot about and still do is real world assets, right? Like how do we bridge kind of this meat space world with this emerging internet world? And I think there's been lots of experiments related to it, but we haven't yet seen that happen at scale. I don't know when that happens. That could happen in the next cycle, but it may be a little bit longer than that. I also think outside of NFTs, we haven't seen the level of enterprise adoption that I think folks were thinking about in the early days. Working with and kind of incorporating into the financial services industry, as opposed to just kind of building something that is adjacent or like a new channel for finance or, financialization or financial products and services. I think that's been, I think, harder than some people would have anticipated off the bat. But maybe not other people, right? If you went to like a seasoned VC investor back then, they would probably say, hey, enterprise adoption is going to be like a long slog, right? So I think that's probably where we'll continue to see growth. And I think also, there's areas, and this is what makes it so fun as we see these systems get more complex, that I think some people were thinking about, but it was a little bit more muted, that look like they're going to be huge categories, whether that's kind of like the social aspects of Web3 that we're beginning to see, or even NFTs, right? Like I think people thought NFTs were interesting, but not as big of a category as it appears to be, right? So I think that's been pretty fun to watch as well.
When we talk about NFTs and however you define the metaverse, what do you think is misunderstood by the public about this and how it relates to crypto? There's a lot of talk of it being a bubble. Was it a bubble? And if it was, like, what's the lasting value that we can expect from it?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think the answer is taking a step deeper and thinking about what a blockchain is. A blockchain is in many ways just an authentication engine, right? It has many characteristics, but really, like, why do we have these decentralized global currencies or quasi-currencies? It's really because blockchain is able to kind of provide some authentication in order to know that you have like an authentic unit of that asset, right? And that same concept really applies to media as well, right? Having an authenticated copy of media is really important. And not to get heady, but if you go back to the writings of like Walter Benjamin, the famous German and French philosopher, there's lots of people that have talked about media and the need for authentication and how it interplays with mass media, right? Which is really what the internet is. It's a mass media machine. So it's an incredibly deep but incredibly important insight and something that blockchains solve. And so I think when people look at NFTs, they just see the price action, but they don't realize that it's really solving a critical problem on the internet, which is that that this NFT is tied and authenticated to an underlying media object or file, right? And if you see projects like generative art, which are mostly or not entirely on-chain, you get really a fully authenticated digital media file. And that's a big deal, right? We didn't have that before. Like it's not something that was possible, except now that we have blockchains, it becomes possible. So I think that's what people kind of miss. They just see like a JPEG of some sort. They see the price action and they think that that's the end of it. I think the other thing that they miss is just it's fun and it's simple. So, there's a lot of engineers that have been building blockchain technology, and a lot of those engineers are kind of financially minded. They're a little less culturally minded. But NFTs, in my mind, have boiled down a lot of the conversations that we've seen over the past X number of years in crypto into something that's more digestible for a mass audience. And it's really hard for people to wrap their heads around the complex mechanics of a DeFi project with like an amorphous governance token that provides, different things that people don't want to know into a DAO that is voting on different, engineering parameters about how these smart contract-based systems should operate. And if you didn't even understand what I just said, that, imagine somebody in the middle of the United States just trying to kind of comprehend that. They're not going to. But lots of people comprehend just status, or I like, this image, or this is something that resonates with me, or I want to be part of an online community. And that's the type of stuff I think you see around NFTs that just really distill down a lot of the concepts in crypto. And I think that's where you're seeing major brands just naturally gravitate towards NFTs, whether that's the NBA or Starbucks, or, we can cackle about the Game of Thrones NFT drop, right, on crypto Twitter, and maybe it wasn't the best drop, but the fact that they're doing it is pretty amazing, right? Like we're not seeing that same level of adoption when it comes to some of the financial primitives on Ethereum. So I think that a lot of people kind of miss that. When it comes to the metaverse, I mean, I think that that's just a broader concept, and people, have lots of debates related to it. But I happen to have kids. I see how they interact online, and they want to be in virtual worlds of some sort. So for me, like a metaverse is a virtual world. If we're going to build a virtual world, do we want to build a company town that's run by, a tech titan? or a tech company, or do we want to have kind of something that is more similar to the real world where, we can have these like property or property right like things kind of ascribed to it, like we do today. And I think we are generally pretty happy with how the physical world is. Lots of problems, but lots of great things about it. So kind of mirroring some of the best parts of it, using smart contract technology into a virtual world, I think is a really interesting concept. And my sense is it's going to be one of these things. We saw this with just crypto, where people kind of cackled at it because somebody overpaid for some metaverse item. But in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, when the kids that are 10 years old now are now 20 or 30, this is the world that they're going to want to build. And we're just going to look like even more boomer than we do today, at least to them. So that's kind of my read of some of the metaverse concepts.
Some of the points you just made, just to quickly summarize, I think Ethereum provides something for everyone, and there's like a freedom and an ability to discover and essentially build, do what you want, and that reflects the kind of life that people really find joy in. I mean, it just goes back to having the freedom to be a human and do as you please, as long as, of course, you're not harming anyone else. And so that's really powerful. I also think that future metaverse, it's very dystopian if it's owned by some corporation or highly controlled and restrictive, based on the control of some entity, versus I think what we're all hoping for is this more decentralized metaverse that has many different layers to it. And one of the constructs of mirroring the world we live in now is money, finance. And so that to me has been one of the things that I believe DeFi actually exists for. Is it's interesting, it's compelling, it can be an alternative digital finance system that uses crypto assets. But at the end of the day, it's actually even more powerful to think about, if we do realize this greater metaverse in the future, this is what enables it to be, digitally scarce value represented through crypto assets and authenticated through, a blockchain like Ethereum.
It's the same authentication piece, right? So you can't really have virtual land unless you can authenticate that you own it. So everybody's been obsessed in crypto about financialization, but it's really authentication that's the much more powerful piece. And then the second piece is just smart contracts create property rights like systems. So you can't really even have something like money without those two things in place. And that's what kind of undergirds a lot of this stuff. And this may be shaded by some of my time around ConsenSys, but I remember ConsenSys was funding projects related to NFTs in 2016, 17, and people were, kind of snickering about it. They thought that Joe and others were lunatics for funding projects related to creating online together or creating NFTs together. But it was spot on. And I think a lot of the metaverse conversation reminds me of that. It could be wildly off. Maybe crypto is not the right fit for it. But my sense is, in order for a metaverse to succeed, you need something like Ethereum, putting aside like the dystopian thing that we talked about before, which I'm pretty sympathetic to as well. I just don't think they're going to work, right? Like, people are not going to want to build in a company town, right? We don't have company towns today that are really big, in part because it just doesn't work. If it worked, we'd see tons of company towns. People need this kind of open, permissionless system, and and they're going to need things like open source technologies just to build this thing that it seems like directionally, people want, right? And those people just may be younger than you are now, and or they may not kind of see the same vision for this future internet that other people do see. So I think it's reasonable to question all these things. But if you think the internet is just going to be browser tabs, and if you think the internet's just going to be, surfing on your mobile device, like, I think that feels like a little bit too constrained. And if you think that the world's not going to have virtual worlds, then you've either never played a video game, like you've never talked to somebody that's under the age of 15, and you're kind of closing your eyes to, I think, the format shifts that we've regularly seen around the internet. So, how many kids that are under the age of 20 even surf the web, right? Like, if you're opening and interacting with the internet via browser, like you're pretty you may be missing kind of where the internet's going directionally.
One of the use cases we started to talk about there that we haven't covered is gaming. Is gaming an early version of the metaverse? Is it the metaverse? And how do you think about the applications of NFTs and Web3 elements in gaming?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super fascinating. It's something I think lots of folks have been fascinated with. I still don't yet have a clear sense, at least in my mind, of what that looks like. We're seeing kind of three major categories of what people are doing. One is, something that is very heavily leaning into crypto with heavy mechanism design, like we saw around lots of DeFi projects. And those are pretty interesting and very ambitious. You're just kind of seeing the intermediary. It's almost like a Web 2.5 approach where they're taking an existing game and then adding in digital assets that can be bought, sold, and traded, which is definitely interesting, but kind of feels like an intermediary step. And then you're seeing a whole bunch of kind of games that are simpler, but are really trying to lean into kind of the core interesting things about crypto, the coordination layer pieces, like the stuff that's coming out of 0x Park. That latter category, I personally find the most interesting. I think starting things simple and then building out these like grand revisions tends to be how crypto has worked well in the past. Like even if you think about DeFi, where did it start? It didn't start with like some complex option derivative system. It started in many ways with things like Maker, right? Over collateralized loans. It started with Uniswap, which at its core is a simple concept, right? Like exchanging assets. And then it's built up from that in terms of complexity. So my sense is GameFi, probably will follow a similar path. But I think there's lots of different, concepts and ideas around that. And it may be shaped a little bit by some of the early successful projects like Axie, which people may be over-indexing a bit, this time around. Maybe that was kind of an outlier instead of the norm. So those are the types of questions I ask. I don't really have the answers. I just ask questions around that. Yeah.
I want to go back to ETH as an asset for a moment, because we've talked about these like infinitely sized economies built on Ethereum and what will be L2s and any other layers in the future. These like infinite, numbers of applications and just ideas that can be built. So when you talk with what I would call like a crypto institutional investor, what are those folks asking about or thinking about ETH nowadays? It's come very far as an asset. Many years ago, there's a lot of hand waving that if everything gets built on Ethereum, does that mean that the native token, which essentially is like a representation of the highway that all this is built on, does that mean it's worth more? But so much has changed now that ETH tokenomics have essentially been upgraded since the merge and with EIP 1559. So just curious, are you hearing more interest from crypto institutional buyers? Like what, if anything, are they finding compelling about ETH, the asset?
Yeah, my understanding, and this is kind of shaped by some of the members of our DAOs and just other conversations, I think a lot of institutional capital left crypto over the past year, and even before kind of the drama that many of us have had to go through and witness and kind of watch from the sidelines. So I do think that there was kind of an exit of capital. I will say, I mean, putting aside whether institutions like it or not, the thing that makes me most encouraged about Ethereum is that they're doing the right things. Like the merge, reduced the environmental impact of digital assets dramatically. And not only is that a super cool technical feat, but it's the right thing to do, right? Like building a system that is going to potentially hurt, the environment is just not great, right? And the fact that this community spent years to try to solve a vexing problem that people didn't think could be fixed, and then fixed it, is just super encouraging. So I'm assuming, things like that are going to be helpful when it comes to Ethereum's adoption by anybody, right? Those could be individuals or institutions. I think the other thing just about Ethereum, which is really interesting, is the kind of new, validation and staking primitives that we're beginning to see emerge. And hopefully they don't run into technical issues, but things like eigenlayer and this notion that we can actually have kind of what I've been calling, in my mind at least, like a utility-based yield curve, like providing an actual service that's securing a decentralized network, earning fees from that, I think is a really, really healthy development for Ethereum and shows that it's kind of growing up. So when you look at DeFi, I think there was really two waves. The first one was DeFi Summer, which was awesome. People were able to earn assets for trying out a new project and making sure it worked and kind of kicking the tires. And if you were early, maybe you earned a little bit more. But a lot of those projects, unfortunately, just didn't have the lasting power. Like they either were overhyped, underdeveloped. They didn't have the best founders. Normal kind of startup things. And we saw some of the energy kind of, dissipate. And then we saw the second wave with Terra and Luna and Ohm and these very, very aggressive DeFi systems, which grew really fast, but kind of dissipated just as quickly for a variety of reasons. And a lot of that was fueled by speculation, which I think is fine, but was unsustainable. But what's exciting to me about the things that we're seeing at the kind of the base level around staking and validation is that it looks like it's a real sustainable utility-based model. And that's really what Ethereum's been about since the beginning. It's always been about utility, right? Like running and building these decentralized blockchains that needed different transactions to be processed. So you had to pay gas, securing decentralized networks, whether that's a layer 2, a ZK rollup, a dApp chain, a layer 3, a layer 4, a layer 5. Like I'm assuming all that stuff's going to get built. And Ethereum kind of sits at the bottom with all these networks kind of like blossoming from it, almost like a forest of decentralization. And that's great, right? It's all utility based. And I'm assuming institutions will find that attractive.
I couldn't agree more. Aaron, what other trends are you and the investors you interface across all the different DAOs we mentioned? What other trends are you all excited for in 2023?
Yeah. I'd say over the past couple of months, really even before kind of some of the market dislocation that we saw, we really started focusing inwardly around infrastructure. I think the merge was a really big event, right? It was huge for the reasons we just described, but also it just changes the kind of network architecture that we needed, and the services and middleware and other pieces related to it. And number two, the advances with ZK technology have kind of exceeded the expectations of some of its early proponents. And we're, I think, beginning to see, really interesting technology being developed to kind of build out the plumbing for that part of the ecosystem as well. So that's been a big focus of many of our DAOs. Lots of the members are just super bullish on NFTs and continue to be. I think we've seen a number of those projects continue to develop and continue to build really interesting technology related to it. And as kind of a broad asset class, it's frankly, parts of it have held up quite well if you're measuring kind of your returns on an Ether basis. And many of our members really are. They're trying to kind of maximize their Ether. They don't really care about the price of US dollars. And I think that's going to continue to develop, right? So on the NFT side, you have lots of interesting development when it comes to music NFTs, when it comes to digital fashion, when it comes to this intersection of the real world and the digital world. And I think I saw yesterday, if you look at some of the metrics and you see like new users, new Ethereum addresses, like what's their first transaction, it's often associated with an NFT. Just they're easier for people to understand. They're easier to interact with. So I think if you're thinking about the next X, million, billion people that are going to use Ethereum at some point, where are they going to come in? It's probably going to be around NFTs. And I think DeFi is going to grow up and mature and feel a little bit more like e-commerce, right? So like e-commerce is huge. Some of the biggest projects in the world are e-commerce companies. But, after Web 1, it got like a little bit sleepier, right? And I think that may be what we see kind of around DeFi in the near term. That may change, right? If there's technical improvements in terms of throughput, right? If some of the ZK tech or other related technology gets better, if we move from bridges to money relayers, right? And instead of these like rickety bridges we built and we can have more kind of cross-chain activity, I think we'll see a lot more stuff kind of manifesting around DeFi.
What are a few of the most repeatable characteristics you recognize in the most successful founders and protocols? And this can be across, DeFi, pure NFT types of projects, Web3 gaming. Just what are a few of those characteristics you look for as an investor?
Yeah. I've just had the pleasure of just talking and working with lots of different teams. It's kind of like I don't really have an answer. It's kind of like a feeling. So, I think there's lots of interesting projects that people are working on, but I don't know, sometimes you just talk to a team or kind of digging in and you're like, wow, that's a really cool, interesting, asymmetric kind of take on a problem that they solved. I think like Uniswap's a great example there, right? Like they just kind of had just a completely different approach than a lot of the other decentralized exchanges that were around before Uniswap. And there its passion, right? We were fortunate enough to be some of the earliest supporters of our blocks, and just talking to Eric and just seeing his passion for what he's doing, you just knew that, he was going to crush it. You just talked to him and you're like, wow, this guy's really got it.
I love it. I've got one final question for you. If you were new to crypto in 2023, what advice would you give yourself or anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate enough to work with some people that lived through kind of the transition from Web 1 to Web 2. And I actually asked them kind of a question like that, many moons ago. And they always just said, hang on, right? I think lots of people, get excited or they lose interest, but it's really the folks that kind of stick around in the industry, whether it's good or bad, that tend to see, where the puck is going and can build this out. And in my mind, what we're going through and putting aside the headlines, it's a big deal, right? If you look at the size of just like the U.S. economy in terms of what's its GDP output for financial services, for cultural output, it is a huge, huge swath of the pie. And these are the types of businesses and that people are trying to modernize and update and make better, right? And make more global, to make more equitable. And I think that broad vision is not going to dull, regardless of whether or not a price is at one point or not another point. And it's just really a question of time horizon, right? Does this take 10 more years to kind of build out a full future? Does it take 15 years? Does it take 20 years? Those are the types of things I think we as humans are not the best at. But I think that kind of broad vision that was set out by the early folks in the Ethereum community will continue to punch above its weight, and it will continue to get developed, not because of hype and speculation. It's because it's what people want. It's solving problems and it's delivering utility. And I think nothing in my mind is more important than building a healthier, internet, a healthier ecosystem, and really kind of enabling this immense creative energy and output that we see online, and helping that kind of mature with digital assets and other rights and tools that we can provide.
Well said. I'm always struck by, despite the really intense conversations, debates that go on, the core of who we all are. I know, at least in the Ethereum community and sometimes in the broader crypto community, it's remarkable how much we all have in common. But again, we focus, of course, on these debates about, the merge and royalty fees. But like the 99% of those people is deeply aligned, and I think they forget that and get caught up in typical sorts of human pitfalls of just arguing about stuff that really you could find some way to compromise around.
Yeah, it's funny. I because I loved history, I read some early accounts of like America when it was founded, and it was fractious, right? Like there was lots of really intense debates, and I think we were just so used to like a very manicured media environment that what we see online and kind of the back and forth and seeing kind of how discourse happens, it's uncomfortable, right? It's not easy for everybody to participate in that, but that's really how you get to the right answers. That's how you kind of set things up right. So I love everybody loves a little crypto Twitter drama, so you kind of have
We do.
Yeah.
Aaron, if someone wants to follow your work or get in touch with you, where would you recommend they go?
Yeah, it's usually Twitter. I've been like a little bit more quiet on Twitter recently, but you can follow me at AWRIGH01 if you want to see what Tribute Labs is up to or some of the DAOs that we've helped start and or support. You can go to tributelabs.xyz, and always happy to try to help out where I can.
Hey, well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me. I felt like we covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time, so we'll have to do this again soon. And dude, congrats on all the success going into 2023. I'm excited to work on Ready Player DAO with you and countless other projects, so thanks so much. Thanks for stopping by, and don't forget to subscribe to my videos and podcasts at DeFiDad.com.